Greetings and welcome to the channel. Now in this video we're going to talk about the difference between modern Viking swords and the original Viking swords. What's the difference? Well, modern swords are generally not pattern welded for combat, whereas the original pattern swords were pattern welded. And I find that to be a fascinating fact. So let's explore this interesting subject in this video. So here we can see two Viking swords. The one at the bottom is a late Vendel early Viking sword, and the one on top, a Paul Binns, is a combat blade. But what is the difference between the two blades? Well, first of all, this one is pattern welded. And all Viking swords back in the day would have been pattern welded and would have had a good quality edge of steel, of far better quality metal than the pattern welded itself. And you can see above the Paul Binns is a combat blade made from EM45 steel, spring steel. And I must say, that is a very, very nice blade. And what I like about it, it's got a very nice and long handle for your hand, for your grip. And I think that's really quite essential, because what you don't want is the pommel to be rubbing on your wrist. And I do think it is a fascinating thing. Now, one thing that always comes to my mind is the question of what period of history were the most pattern welded swords and Viking swords made? Was it during the Viking times when most Viking swords have been made, or is it in the modern times? Because let's face it, there's so many manufacturers of these combat blades and pattern welded swords. You can see where my finger's pointing. It does make me think. Of course, with a modern sword like this, there's not so many hours of work compared to a pattern welded sword, because in a pattern welded sword there's literally hundreds and hundreds of hours. If you're making it without using modern machinery, making it all by hand, then there's a tremendous amount of work involved. Generally, with a modern sword, I would presume and think that most of them are laser cut out first of all in a blank shape and then worked afterwards. That's how I would do it if I was going to mass produce swords. Of course, the trick of making a good sword is having the heat treatment right and making sure that you heat the tang, which is this section here underneath the handle, compared to the blade itself. And then, of course, the other skill you have to include in the sword is the fuller, which is not a blood groove. No, it's not for releasing the sword and letting the blood out. It is there designed to make the blade wider, to take out some of the weight, and it's just a very crucial bit of a sword itself. Now on this one you can just see the pattern welded effect, and you can also see the fuller, which is not so wide as this one. But I find Viking swords to be fascinating. You can see the scabbard of the Viking pattern welded sword here. It's got a very nice bottom mount and a very nice scabbard. And remember, scabbards are always solid in construction, whereas sheaths are flexible. And I cannot stress enough that point so many times, because people forget that. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these two blades do you prefer and like? If you like the pattern welded blade, then please go and leave me a comment saying pattern welded. And if you like the combat blade, then leave me a comment saying combat blade, and include a couple of shield emojis for me, because that's a good way for you to interact on the channel and to join and take part. Now, as for the origins of these swords, well, this sword here from Paul Binns I bought off eBay, got to be 15 years ago, and I think I paid about £120 for it, and it did come with a sheath. Very nice indeed. I've used this in Viking battles quite a lot, and I really did like using it. It's a really nice blade. Now this pattern welded blade originally used to belong to Tyr Thorkelson, our first host on the channel. And if you've not watched any of his brilliant Viking content of stories of the Viking gods and the everyday people of the medieval age and the folk tales and the stories, then I urge you to go and check that out. Now the story with this pattern welded sword was that Paul Binns found this in a Danish blacksmith's workshop at the back of his workshop, just the blade all rusty, and he kind of wondered what it was and then realised it was pattern welded. I ended up buying it off the blacksmith, and eventually it was sold to Tyr Thorkelson for around about £500, which is what I think I paid for it, if I recall, which is worth every penny. I'm sure you agree. I couldn't really go out and do that today as I don't have £500 with the cost of living. I can barely afford to feed myself some days, but it's not bad for my diet. Of course, the other nice thing about this pattern welded sword is it's got a pattern welded pommel and crossguard, and I believe they were made by Paul Binns, and it's got a very nice walnut handle. Now me and Egil Thorson used to talk about this blade, and we used to compare the length and talk about why it's so short. Now during the Vendel period, the pre-Viking era, and the very early Viking era, swords were much shorter. Through time they progressed in length. And you can see as I compare the two, the combat blade is probably 2 to 2.5 inches longer, 7.5 centimetres longer than the Viking pattern welded sword. And again, you could also see the difference between the size and the length of the handle. This one, the pattern welded, is very short in length, and it's not designed for combat. It's just designed to be displayed, and it's a wonderful object to talk about. Now this is one of these unscripted videos. I don't have a script for this video. You can probably tell from the way I'm talking, but I wanted to make a video on these two blades and compare the two because I think it's fascinating. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Always love reading your comments, and yes, I got quite a few comments to reply to. I've just been too busy, but I will get onto that in the next few days. I just think they're awesome. If you're new to the channel and you don't know who we are, then we are Northworthy Sagas and Stories, and we talk about Viking history and Saxon history. But generally we are interested in all eras of history. I'm currently watching the TV series called Colditz on YouTube, and I'm finding that quite fascinating. And I'm now thinking about reading a couple of books on Colditz. I know it's much later than the Viking Age, but as a historian, as somebody that loves history, I think we should cover all history in time on the channel. And of course the other thing we do on the channel is retell stories and folk tales. That is how we started. It's how we're going to end the channel. Not that I plan to end it anytime soon. So let me know, folks. And what would you want me to talk about next in a video? I'm always up for suggestions. I like to cover some of these subjects that a lot of people don't cover because I find them to be fascinating. I'm actually filming this on a settee. I'll just show you a quick glimpse of where we are. We're in a conservatory. You can see a load of plants and a hoover. So goodbye from Bloggy, and I'll see you in the next video.